And I also want to share my screen. Can I do that? I can. There it goes.
Now,
Yeah, go ahead.
The subject wakes up in my mind when our congregation was building our building on site.
Yeah.
God's way, the Lord's what I
yes, right.
The Washington Jewish Week gave us a front page coverage on indicting us for picking a Christian construction company.
Right. So I don't remember that. And
I do. I wrote them a scathing letter saying, "Do you know the political beliefs of your lawnmower, or
right.
from whom you buy fruit?"
Right.
It's irrelevant.
Exactly. And right. Well, it gets to the point here that we've been learning in the Talmud, the different, and I've been talking about almost every week, that there's a difference between idolaters and those who worship other monotheistic religions. So Christians and Muslims, is no problem in doing business with Christians and Muslims because they're not idolaters. The problem is idolatry. So therefore the problem in the Torah is for people who reject God. So it would seem that in the Torah that the preference is to worship God in the Israelite way. But the issue for the Torah of why the indigenous population of the land of Canaan needs to be annihilated is because their cultural practices are an abomination in that they worship idols. So that's the issue. So if you don't worship an idol, you're okay. And at the same time, the Torah also recognizes the righteousness of the children of the sons of Noah, the descendants of Noah, who only have to observe 7 moral laws, as opposed to Jews who have to observe 613. So there is a notion of righteous among the nations, and as long as they're not idolaters. So it's not a problem to do. The only issue that comes up in synagogue buildings is that if you sell the synagogue building, who you're selling to. So that's why Beth Shalom, for example, in Potomac, was on 13th Street in the district. And when they sold their building, the building is now a church, an Ethiopian Christian church. So what they did is had a middleman. They technically sold the building to an individual Jewish middleman, who then sold the building to the church, because technically speaking, a synagogue should not be sold to a church or to a mosque. It should only be sold to another synagogue, based on the idea, I think we saw this last time, Ma'alin Bakodesh ve'ein moridin. You raise up in holiness, but you cannot go down in holiness. So the idea of a synagogue selling to a church is lowering in holiness. I did not see that as an issue, and that's why, it didn't come up in our negotiations with that Hispanic church that bought our building on Lockwood Drive. So it's not an issue for me, but it might have been an issue if we were selling it to Wiccans or any other pagan organization. Okay, so let me say yes, Lori, and then wait. Let me before you ask your question, let me just say the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Go ahead, Lori. Wait, you're muted.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And I don't mean this question with any disrespect to
that's all right.
Christians or anything like that. I just don't understand. So if you accept a human being as God, how come that's not idol worship?
So technically speaking, um, look, I'm not Christian. So what I know about Christianity is that yes, Jesus is the Son of God, and technically that's according to Christianity, of course. And technically, according to Christianity, they are monotheistic, but with monotheism in three parts: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? So that those are three aspects of God, almost as if we would say there are 70 names to God. And there's, on the high holidays, we focus on God as sovereign of the universe. But when we pray for the ill, we focus on God as healer. When we are being being attacked as the nation of Israel, we pray to God who is going to battle for us. So there are different aspects of God that we also focus on, depending on our mood and what's happening on our personal life or in the community's life. So I think that's how Christians explain it too. So
Okay.
I don't know, what different aspects Father, Son, and Holy Spirit represent within Christian theology. That's for Christianity class, but that's how they understand it. And as I said another time, walking into a Catholic church and seeing a statue of Jesus in the front of the room and other statues all around, are only vehicles to help focus the worshiper on what they're supposed to be focusing on in prayer. They're not meant to be the object of the worship. They're meant to be an end to the means of worship.
Mhm.
Okay, that's not a promotion of Christianity. It's just an explanation of why Christianity is not idolatry.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Steve.
So going back to the idol worship uh, prohibitions,
Yeah.
it seems to me that a lot of this is a reaction to the history of the Israelites who, through various times, were worshiping idols and other gods. In the Bible, it has
Yeah.
that. Post
Yeah.
post Torah, a lot. There's a lot of this king, was into the idols or whatever.
Right.
One
Right.
wasn't, and it seems like that's where a lot of this really strong
Yes.
restriction comes from. A reaction.
So, yes. So, well, so yes, I do agree with you, Steve, and I think I do agree with biblical scholars that the Torah as we have it is a collection of different source material that was passed down and developed over the centuries and probably put together in the form that we have it around the time of the exile in Babylonia. So that tends to be the predominant theory on the origin of the Torah. As opposed to the traditional Jewish belief that the origin of the Torah is from God to Moses at Mount Sinai. Okay, so there are those Orthodox biblical scholars who, for faith purposes, see the Torah uh, in that way that it's from God, but can also at the same time understand what the scholarship of the Torah is in terms of language, who may have written it, that kind of thing. So there was. I just read something last night, a review of a book that just came out from a colleague of mine, Rabbi Ed Feld, is the main editor of the Siddur and the Machzor that we now use, the Lev Shalem, the red Lev Shalem prayer book, and the brown Machzor Lev Shalem is edited by Rabbi Ed Feld. And so he just wrote a book called The Book of Revolutions. I think it's plural. And it's an explanation, not a, it's, there might be footnotes in it, but it's not meant to be an academic work. It's a distillation of biblical scholarship to explain different theories about the authorship of the Torah. So I imagine it should be a good book. It's published by the Jewish Publication Society. I didn't order it. It's on Amazon, and it's in paperback for $30. So that's he brings out the latest scholarship on that. So I agree with you, Steve. I think the Torah and the Bible is a reaction to what's happening in Israel at the time, and the laws as presented are a way to is the author's idea of how to respond to society, Israelite society as it is. So Israelite society was idolatrous, was pagan. So the laws that are anti-pagan are a response to the lawlessness, the depravity of Israelite society. So that it makes sense, and that is the accepted theory. Okay, any other thoughts or comments? So last time we talked about, and I said I would look into whether it was okay for Jews to sell pig or be involved in non-Jewish commerce. So Michael Gross, who's not here today, gave the example of either his grandfather or an uncle or somebody whose business was across the street from a church, and he was in the business of selling votive candles that are used in church. I guess these are candles that you light when you enter church, I guess. So, and there are Jews in Israel who are pig farmers. I guess there are Jews around the world who are pig farmers. Are we allowed to engage in that kind of business? So, and the little bit of research I did, the simple answer is no. Jews should not be engaging in any business that goes against Jewish law. So, however, there are still Jews who engage in that business. But so why is that? Well, okay, who's to tell Jews what to do? So, right, there are many Jews who own kosher style restaurants, right? Like Atman's Deli in Baltimore, for example, that has a branch in Potomac. Atman is Jewish, but the deli is not kosher. So he is selling, perhaps the cold cuts are from kosher cuts of meat, but they also, they sell Reuben sandwiches, which are a Reuben sandwich, corned beef and Swiss cheese is not exactly a kosher sandwich. So the simple answer is no, Jews should not be engaging in that, but nonetheless Jews do. So I don't know of if a rabbi is asked a question, should a Jew go into that kind of business? The answer should be no. But if a Jew does, it doesn't mean necessarily that Jew's a bad person. People have to make a living. So you make a living any way you can. And there's nothing immoral about raising pigs or selling trafe. Well, yeah, there's nothing immoral about it. Whereas you might have a better argument about morality as to whether a Jew can own a gun shop. Okay, so even though guns are legal to own, so you're not violating American law by owning a gun shop and selling guns, you might have a question, a deeper question of whether it's appropriate to sell guns. It's one thing to sell a rifle that's used for hunting. It's another thing to sell a semi-automatic rifle. Okay, so there'll be so in other words, the question about kind of business that Jews should go into is that as long as it's legal in the country that you're operating in, then on the one hand, there's nothing wrong with it. But on the other hand, from an Orthodox perspective, because that's all I saw on the internet while I was researching it, from an Orthodox perspective, Jews should not be doing that. So there are some throwaway magazines that you find sometimes in the kosher markets around here that advertise businesses mainly in Baltimore. And, ideally, a Jew should only engage in business with another Jew, both of them being Shomer Shabbos, observant of Shabbat. So this applies mainly to kosher establishments that, the kosher stores, motis, and shaloms in our area. There are some kosher supervising agencies that would only give the certificate to the stores if they know the owner is a traditional Jew, because being a traditional Jew means that you're trustworthy, supposedly. And so therefore, these magazines that advertise businesses in Baltimore, there are plumbers who advertise as being Shomer Shabbos. There are car dealers who advertise as being Shomer Shabbos. Insurance salesmen who advertise as being Shomer Shabbos, theoretically giving the impression that they're more reliable than a regular insurance salesman or plumber, etc. So, I'll just leave it at that. So even though technically speaking, there is an answer that Jews should only engage in Jewish businesses that uphold Jewish law, we know clearly that Jews don't. And I don't, if I weren't a rabbi, would I be a pig farmer? I don't think so, because I was raised in an urban environment. What do I know about being a farmer? But if I were raised on a farm, maybe I would have considered that. Yeah, so Steve put the title of the book a couple of minutes just now on. That's right. That is the Book of Revolutions. Yes. So Debbie and Jesse.
Just this, that
Yeah.
you can engage in endless rationalizations dealing with the question of morality and how far you can depart from the laws. You mentioned, kind of gun ownership. Well, you can rationalize that away.
Right.
But Jews who are engaged, as so many did, in explicitly illegal activity.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. The mafia, right? The
You can,
Jewish
you can
gangsters.
rationalize that as well. You can say, well, the Gentile world is against us, and this is our way of fighting back or undermining authority, which is designed to persecute us.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So like Meyer Lansky, the Bromfmans, who started as in a time of prohibition. Right. So it's interesting. Right. And then smuggling alcohol across the Canadian border into America. Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating how the kinds of businesses that Jews get into, and certainly, I'm part Romanian, and Romanians are known as horse thieves. so, so I have that as part of my heritage. I don't think my great grandfather was a horse thief. This is my mother. It's on my mother's side. My mother's mother was born in Romania, as were her siblings. And I really don't know what my great grandfather, what his business was. I don't think he was a horse thief, but I've heard over the years that's Romanian Jews are horse thieves.
How
Yeah,
about,
yes, Jules.
I have two issues. You're talking about Jews being involved in illicit businesses. What about the slave trade,
Oh,
at
that's
which has
right.
been found out that there were numbers of Jews who
Yes,
were engaged there. But I wanted to ask you another question. It
right.
may not be for this class, but if
Yeah.
you would discuss at some time what qualifies anybody to be excommunicated.
Ah, right. So, first of all, the community has to have real authority over all the Jews in the community for an excommunication to be effective. So, the last real excommunication that was effective was of Spinoza in Holland. Um, so, what qualified that was his supposed non-monotheistic philosophy. That Spinoza's philosophy of pantheism was opposed to, in direct opposition to, Jewish monotheism. And so the rabbinic court of Amsterdam excommunicated him. So, did it effectively ruin Spinoza's life? I don't think so. I'm not sure how much she was part of the Jewish community at that point anyway. Mordecai Kaplan in America of the prior century was a great philosopher and sociologist of the Jewish community, and he's the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism. And so there were rabbis in America who burned Mordecai Kaplan's Siddur that he edited for the Reconstructionist Jewish movement. So was that effective? No, it was a publicity ploy, because here in America there is no one Jew that speaks for all Jews in America. So let's say if I were excommunicated by an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, it would be an ineffective excommunication. It would mean that I wouldn't be welcome into an ultra-Orthodox community. Well, that doesn't matter to me, because I I rarely step foot into an ultra-Orthodox community, let alone going into an ultra-Orthodox synagogue on Shabbat. That I don't think I've ever done that in my life. So, so excommunication today in the Jewish world is ineffective. Even in Israel, it's still such a multifaceted Jewish community in Israel. Excommunication really wouldn't work there. So, right, well, that's Ashkenazi and Sephardi chief rabbis, but they're both ultra Orthodox. So, yeah, so it really wouldn't work today. Your comment though, Jules, about the slave trade, I would say at the time the slave trade was legal. Our perspective now is that almost everyone agrees that it's illegal now and immoral. But at the time of the Civil War, there were rabbis in the South who were pro-slavery and rabbis in the North who were abolitionists. Rabbis of the same stream of Judaism interpreting the Torah, to one saying that slavery is permitted, the other saying it's clear in the Torah that slavery is forbidden. So, that you could say the same about gun control argument as well. I think, at least I would say that there are a lot of rabbis who would say that would support the sale of guns for hunting. And there are other rabbis who would reject the idea that any gun should be legal at all. So, okay. Any other? Yes, go ahead, Steve.
So those Southern rabbis, how do they, if they were using the Torah, it would still seem to me that they and have a hard time justifying the treatment of those slaves because the Torah laws on slaves
Right.
were
Yes,
much
you're supposed to treat them, you're supposed to feed them and treat them well. Exactly. Yes, that's a whole other argument. I think the rabbis were preaching in theory about whether slavery is permitted or not. They were not preaching about the treatment of the slaves. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I have.
Yes, Bess, go ahead.
Okay, Arthur Sulzberger, a Jewish publisher of the New York Times, has in the paper, there are advertisements for businesses that are not kosher, restaurants.
Right.
We had our old the tower instead of the shofar.
Yes, right.
We would advertise restaurants that were not
Right.
kosher, not telling our membership to eat there, but to support
Right.
our neighborhood. So
Right.
what is the position? Is it shady now? Is it just like the gun store owner? Do you support him? Do you not support him?
Well, it's a Jew, like the Washington Jewish Week, having the recipes in there are kosher recipes, but the advertisements of restaurants are of unkosher restaurants. But the Jewish Week doesn't it doesn't say that it is a denomination oriented newspaper. It is a secular Jewish newspaper. So yeah, it's a slippery slope, Bess, and there's no one right answer that will apply to every situation. And so Orthodox synagogues in their newsletters would never consider accepting ads from non-kosher establishments. And like the Hebrew Academy, for example, if they had a program book or something for a fundraiser, I'm sure would not accept ads from non-kosher establishments. It would just be that it's just not allowed to do. But I remember from my own high school yearbook in Philadelphia, my Jewish high school that I went to, Akiba Hebrew Academy, where, by the way, the new governor of Pennsylvania graduated from, and Jake Tapper from CNN also went to Akiba Hebrew Academy. So I was, my senior year, I was like on the yearbook staff, and what my job was to try to get ads, and I wasn't restricted in any way from where to get an ad from. So if there was a non-kosher restaurant in the area, I was allowed to go and get an ad from them. Michael.
The Talmud doesn't say you can't do business with non-Jews, or I don't even think
it says
you
the non-Jews are only idolaters that they're talking about here.
Understood.
Right.
So it doesn't say you can't. You can't do religiously oriented business with
Right.
them, but you could buy a cow from
Right.
a non-Jew. It's not that you can't do business with them.
Right. So we've been
So-
discussing the kind of business that you can do, and whether chapter 2 of this tractate gets into buying an animal from a non-Jew, and the concern is what was done with that animal before you buy it,
But
and whether you can trust. And this, I mean,
let's make
you
it
let
easier.
your imagination run wild in terms of what was done with that animal.
You could buy a chair from a non-Jew.
Yeah,
It
yes,
was a bad,
right.
It was a bad
No,
example.
I'm just saying
Right.
that it's,
So at what point in history did we go from that to where the Orthodox community says you shouldn't be doing business with non-Jews in the first place?
right. So where do
Somewhere there
where
was
do
a
we
change.
go in history? Well, so
Historically.
the more ultra orthodox you are, and the more insular your community is, the more power you have to maintain the insularity of your community. So if you're living in Muncie, as part of the ultra-Orthodox community, it's going to be quite clear that the rules for the community are such that you got to abide by the very strict fundamentalist rules, which will apply to your personal use of the internet and where you do business and where you go to school, so that you know, so the more ultra orthodox you are, the more anti-other you are, and it's not just against non-Jews; it's also against other so-called Jews. Like the ultra orthodox don't see other Jews as being Jews unless they wear a black coat and a black hat.
So the answer is it's whatever your local Rav decides in your community.
And how you decide whether you decide to be part of that community. Yeah. Yes. Debbie, Jesse.
Which gets back to the question of excommunication,
Uh-huh.
because critics of the Hasidic community are drummed out of that community, which amounts to excommunication.
Right.
And it's quite, I sense that it's quite an effective sanction against any tendency to criticize the community, especially in public.
Yeah.
And where do you go? I mean, if that's your definition
Right.
of Judaism and everything else is just a pale, essentially Christian or,
Right.
or something, it becomes quite an effective sanction.
Absolutely. They know they have the rabbis in the ultra orthodox world know they have complete control over their community, because as soon as the members of the community are engaged in the community, in other words, they're married to somebody, they have children, then they're stuck in the community because it's harder to leave. And even if you're, just a child, you're not married yet, to leave the community means leaving your family behind. And, there are a lot of books that have been written lately and movies and TV shows that have come out about such people who have taken the risk in leaving their community, and what that meant for themselves, and what they're giving up by doing that.
Yeah,
And the risk to the family members of those who leave, if they want to maintain contact with the person that left. So they're putting themselves at risk as well. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I assume people saw the article in the New York Times about
Divorce.
a mom who had a get.
Yes.
And they were
Yeah. So just
their
so
children
the
in
condition.
religious schools.
Wait, Jesse. The condition of the get was that the children still had to go to that ultra orthodox yeshiva,
Exactly.
even though the mother was not part of the ultra orthodox community anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah. So so it's a condition of the get, which is also the condition of the civil divorce agreement. It's one thing to get a get. It's another thing you have what makes there are states in America. I don't know if it's every single state that can allow, as a condition of the divorce, the civil divorce, that a get be issued. So that I think most states on the East Coast, if not all states in the country, have that, allow a religious component to the civil divorce. And then there's also, in the couple reaching whatever divorce agreement, they can also maintain, like, the child needs to become bar or bat mitzvah in this particular synagogue, and they need to continue to attend this particular school. These conditions, can be applied to the divorce agreement, and sometimes, it's part of a blackmail kind of arrangement that is held over each spouse's head.
Not just Jewish. Maryland, for example, says if you're any religious, must be.
Yeah. So Michael's bringing it up that this applies to every religion, can have its stipulations in the civil divorce agreement. But, we're only talking about Jewish stuff here. But yeah. Okay. Anything else about about this before we actually get into the text today. So it's already 10:09, and I'm going to have to leave at 10:20 today because I have a 10:30 Zoom meeting that I have to get ready for. So last time we left off at the second to last paragraph on page 67 here. Rabbi Yossi says. So we have to understand the context here. So let's start here. The Gemara interrupts its citation of the Baraita to express surprise at this last ruling. Can it enter your mind to say that a priest may become impure by entering a cemetery? The halacha that a cemetery imparts ritual impurity to a priest is by Torah law. How could the sages override this prohibition? So in other words, in the Torah, a Kohen is only allowed to become impure for any relative that he would be saying Kaddish for. So any blood relative that a Kohen says Kaddish for, he's allowed to become impure for the funeral preparations or even going into the cemetery. Any other,
And his
what's
wife.
that?
And his wife.
That's okay. So not just
Not
blood
blood.
relative. I mean, so I started it by saying anybody he would say Kaddish for. So then anybody else he's not allowed to become impure for. So the halacha, right. So how could the sages override this prohibition? Rather, the Baraita is referring to an area where there is uncertainty with regard to the location of a grave or a corpse, owing to the fact that a grave had been unwittingly plowed over, and the bones may have become scattered throughout the field. Such a field imparts ritual impurity by rabbinic law. So we're talking about a Kohen walking through such a field where there might be bones there, where a Kohen is allowed to do that, and that's because it's rabbinic law, not Torah law. So now the Baraita continues, and a priest may likewise become ritually impure and leave Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, in order to study Torah or in order to marry a woman. So there's this concept that the land of Israel is pure. And therefore, if a Kohen lives in the land of Israel, the Kohen isn't allowed to leave the land of Israel because the Kohen would then become impure. This applies really only when the temple is standing and functioning. Okay, because nowadays there's impurity everywhere, and the maintaining the purity of the Kohen is purely symbolic. Okay, because we are all impure. All of us are impure, and there's nothing we can do to purify ourselves until the temple is rebuilt. Okay, because the only way to no matter what kind of impurity it is, the only way to become impure is by going to the mikveh and bringing a sacrifice. So if you can't do both, we could go to the mikveh. There are kosher mikvehs around, but there's no way to bring a sacrifice in order to complete the purification process. So without that, every single Jewish person is technically impure. So when we wash our hands before saying hamotzi, it's symbolic, the purification that's taking place. When we wash our hands after departing a cemetery, it's purely symbolic, because really to become purified after coming into contact with the dead is to have the ashes of the red heifer sprinkled on us. And we can't have that until the temple's rebuilt in Jerusalem. So this whole argument about a Kohen not leaving the land of Israel is only when the temple is standing. So it just adds to the extra responsibilities of the Kohen that they have to stay in the land of Israel and stay pure. But there are exceptions that a Kohen could leave the land of Israel in order to study Torah or to marry a woman. So if a match was made for this Kohen with a Babylonian Jewish woman, and that is the most fitting woman for this Kohen to marry, then that's okay. Or if the best place for this particular Kohen to study Torah is outside the land of Israel, then that's okay. So Rabbi Yehuda says, when does this allowance apply? Like when is that Kohen allowed to leave the land of Israel? It applies when he cannot find a place to study in the land of Israel. But when the priest can find a place to study in Eretz Israel, he may not become ritually pure by leaving the country, right? If there's a yeshiva in the land of Israel, the Kohen shouldn't be allowed to leave. Rabbi Yossi says, and this is where we now pick up from last time, even when he can find a place to study Torah in Eretz Israel, he may leave the country and become ritually impure because a person does not merit to learn from everyone. And it's possible that the more suitable teacher for him lives outside of Eretz Israel. So this is fascinating. The rabbis understand everybody has a different kind of learning style. And it's possible that this Kohen has a particular learning style. Or if we want to say it in modern parlance, maybe this Kohen has a particular learning disability. And there aren't adequate Torah study places in the land of Israel where with teachers who are trained in how to educate according to that particular disability. Maybe the Kohen is dyslexic and the teachers don't know how to deal with dyslexia. I tell you, it's a problem. It's one thing learning English in America if you're dyslexic. Imagine if you're Jewish and dyslexic and need to learn how to read Hebrew. So that's an incredibly challenging task. And I only know about this because this is the work that Lenore does at the Jewish Day School in finding resource teachers who are trained in a whole variety of learning methods to help all kinds of kids with all kinds of learning issues. And then also because there's a Judaic studies curriculum and a Hebrew curriculum at the day school, finding specialists who are trained for applying those skills and strategies to Hebrew. So it's really they're few and far between here in America. So that's what came to mind in this, that not everybody can learn from every single teacher. It takes a particular, you got to find the right rapport and also maybe to find the right strategies there. So if the only place is outside the land of Israel, then the Kohen can go there. Rabbi Yossi says, in support of his opinion, there was an incident involving Yosef the priest, who followed his teacher to the city of Sidon, which is in Lebanon today, outside of the land of Israel, to learn Torah, even though the preeminent sage of his generation, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, lived in Eretz Israel. And Rabbi Yochanan says about this, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. So the personalities there on the right-hand side, Yosef the priest. Apparently, this is another name for Rabbi Yossi the priest, one of the great disciples of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was a colleague of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach and Rabbi Yehoshua, and like them, he was a scholar of Agadah, lore, as opposed to law, and the esoterica of the Torah. He was praised by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai as a pious individual. There are several anecdotes of his life and the manner in which he died, which justify this high praise. Yosef the priest lived during the time of the Second Temple. Certain aspects of his family life are documented. He already had a family during the time of the Temple. His wife died young, and he later married her sister, and he had a son named Honiah. Okay, so if he was living at the time that the temple was standing, then the law of the priest staying in Israel applies, but he left Israel in order to study. Even though one of his teachers was Yochanan ben Zakkai, it's good to have more than one teacher. So we can do one more paragraph. The Gemara returns to the issue at hand. This Baraita apparently indicates that the rabbis do disagree with Rabbi Natan, as they hold that it is permitted to buy items from a Gentile fair and cause benefit to idol worship, whereas the ruling of Rabbi Natan is a minority opinion. So in other words, we're back to the topic of whether you're allowed to buy from a non-Jewish vendor who has non-Jewish adornments in their shop. We were told before, rose and myrtle, decorating like a wreath of rose and myrtle that apparently is used to worship Dionysus. Is it okay to do business with that vendor because you're somehow secondarily benefiting their worship of Dionysus? The Gemara responds, Rabbi Yochanan could have said to you, actually, the rabbis do not disagree with Rabbi Natan, and even according to this Baraita, one is prohibited from causing benefit from idol worship. The Gemara elaborates, and the fact that the Baraita permits buying at a Gentile fair is not difficult, as here, where Rabbi Natan prohibits buying items from a Gentile fair, he states his ruling with regard to one who buys from a merchant, as a tax is taken from him for the benefit of idol worship. Whereas there in the Baraita that permits buying items at the fair, it states its ruling with regard to one who buys from a homeowner, that is a private individual, where a tax is not taken from him. All right, so it's in other words, it's like buying with cash or buying with credit card, and what's going to be actually noted as part of the sale. So if tax is taken, then you can't do it because the tax is going to the idol worship. But if no tax is taken, then it's okay, right? So it's still the idea you cannot benefit primarily or secondarily any form of idol worship. Okay, so we'll stop here at the red S for today. Just a second here. How do I stop share? There we go. So we will, next 2 Sundays, we will not meet because I will be away. So we meet again on January 8th. Okay, Sunday, January 8th, we'll meet again, and we'll be meeting for several Sundays in a row until President's Weekend, when I will be away again. So, yeah. Okay. Have a good day, everybody. Happy Hanukkah tonight. I hope.
Thank you all.
And thanks to Judy, Jules' daughter, for putting that background there, the Hanukkah background. And happy, healthy holiday.
Good luck, guys.
Thank you.